Apropos to approaching my new intelligence. Remember? New intelligence. It does not come about through more reading or more studying. It comes about through more thinking. That's right. More thinking, all the time and flexibly at that. No substitute. And everything, if we were back at city level, if there was no chance at anyone ever reaching escape velocity, then this would be ridiculous. Because if I were talking to ordinary people, that is, if I were talking to you at the ordinary level, that is, if I was talking to you and you weren't listening at the ordinary level, then to say that there was some way to be, or that there was something I was referring to as new intelligence, if there was such a possibility, ordinary consciousness would say to you, that is, to itself, and anyone else who would stand still long enough to listen to that kind of stuff, it would say, all right, if there is such a thing as a new kind of intelligence, whatever you mean, it would have to come about through some sort of study. Because I don't know what you mean, so you'd have to tell me, assuming that you know, you'd have to tell me, and then I would study it. In fact, being the busy person that I am with my particular busy lifestyle, do you have it written down, and I'll read it, and then I'll study it. New intelligence, what I mean by it, does not come about. Well, I'll have to get philosophically technical. Does anybody remember your Greek? Well, all right, I'll translate it. No way. That's a rough translation, but I think that covers it. This new intelligence does not come about through reading of any sort. No more reading, no additional reading, no additional study. It comes about one way. Now we've got to jump from the city level because it wouldn't happen back there, and of course I mean something a little more. But the approach is simply to think more. Now, good old ordinary thinking is going to say what? All right, I'll tell you. It's going to say, Jesus, I think all the time as it is. Ordinary intelligence is going to say, Jesus, I don't notice any particular times during the day, this for most people, when I'm not thinking. All right, we can't stand around here and beat up on judgments in the 3D world of quantities, because in the 3D world, you got to remember, as much space as you got that much quantity. Always. Now, everybody knows that, don't you? I've never seen fit to lend my name to any actual laws or theories or principles in physics, but in the 3D world, that is the world in which ordinary consciousness can see, there are no empty places. Everywhere you look and you think maybe there's an empty place, you look there and there's stuff. There's always something there. So, there's no sense in having any discussion that says speaking for the quantity of it, there are no empty places in your thinking schedule, that your thinking dance card is filled up. All right. I can't even stop and deal with that because that's the way it appears. So even if that's true, which is not, but it appears to be true, which is good enough for you, right? Right. Even beyond that, it's still true that you got to think more. So it does no good to say, well, I'm thinking all I can. Apparently, all the time you got is filled up by something that you call thinking. But you got to think more. You got to think all the time. This is quite easy to prove, because all you got to do is try to think more, and you can think more. All you got to do is try it. All you got to do is try it at any time that you seem like, well, I'm thinking all I can. Every moment that I'm conscious, every moment that I'm out of bed, I'm thinking of something. All right, just try. I just accept that for the time being. If we got to deal with that kind of dull level. All right, you're thinking all the time. Each and every moment is taken up by some kind of thinking. All right, but here's all you got to do is try to think some more. And just like that, you can think more. That's, of course, not the end of it. But just like that, you can think more. It's part of the wonderful illusionary reality of the 3D world. Because you can, whatever space you find is always filled up, but you can always fill it up more. But nobody wants to, because if you filled it up more, you would then be a part of what everyone fears and dreads. How hollering can the band play something in that key? That is the key of change. But nobody wants to. But once you find out that you can take whatever room is filled up, and whatever it is, you can put in more. That's true for almost everything except, I guess, a toleration for bankers and gin. But other than that, whatever space is being filled up, you can put in more. You can think more. You can think, and now I mean the new kind of thinking, not just what goes on. This forced additional thinking, you got to do it all the time, and it's got to be flexible. And there it is. Then you're on the right approach to a new kind of intelligence. Whatever's going on, you should be thinking. You should be involved with a kind of continual asking yourself a 4D why, which is really synonymous with TWE, if you remember. To what end is this going on? In other ways, I've talked about this in more simplistic ways, or either more complex ways, according to what direction you're firing from, about such things as omnidirectional consciousness or awareness, of trying to keep your mind just sweeping around, trying to think about everything that you may have to do today. Not in kind of worry about it, but to try and simultaneously just take the kind of stuff that normally flows through your own thinking processes. That here you are brushing your teeth, combing your hair, shaving, getting ready to go, listening to whether the coffee is perking yet, trying to keep your eye on the clock, trying to listen to the radio to see if the time that they're announcing matches the clock, then thinking of all the things you got to do today. But not in linear sequence. Think about them all as much as you can. Think about them all together if you can. And don't stop. Things that you got to do at 5:17 this afternoon. Think about them right now. Think about it all day. Things that you might do if you have time. You got time to think about it, but you got time to do it, so think about it. That if you do have time to do it, it would have to occur sometime, of course, after 5:17 and probably between 5:45 and 6:15, because at 6:15 you got something else. Yeah, that's something else I got to do. Think about them all continually, all the time. Not in any ordinary way. And all you got to do is remember to think about them more, and then you're not thinking about them in an ordinary way. There is, I think, one that Kyrute had in a hopper somewhere. Since he stole from me all these years, I guess I'll steal from him before the fact. And I think it was going to go something like this, is that anybody who has an agenda will never hear the doorbell ring. Which I was going to present in another way, but I still like it, because sometimes that rascal has a way with words. That's my opinion, but my opinion's the only thing I care for, as far as opinions go. That anyone who has any sort of intellectual expectations can never learn anything new. Back to the city, that is not true. It's correct, but back in the city it's not true, because that cannot be seen. The 3D level of ordinary intelligence cannot perceive that. You can't study your way into perceiving it. You cannot be instructed in some way. You would have to be able to think more. You would have to be approaching a new kind of intelligence to realize that if you've got any kind of intellectual expectations at the ordinary level, then you cannot learn anything new. That's why the appearance of learning something new never satisfies. Now, of course, I mean something a little beyond the the most physical level. That is, if you keep having trouble with your electric can opener, and then you find a little pamphlet that tells you how to overcome the major contemporary problems that a consumer, Mr. and Ms. consumer, might have with their electric can opener, and you might be pleased to say, ah, that's it, and then you don't have that problem anymore. Beyond that, that which people apparently learn new is never satisfying, is it? Not because it's never what you expected. That anytime you try to read anything much beyond the level of how to deal with contrary small appliances, small electrical appliances, anytime you get into what seems to be the areas of the higher parts of the nervous system, philosophy, metaphysics, religion, all that stuff, psychology, unless you are tried and true, completely dyed in the wool, cityfied, then you have got to be aware of this fact that you have never read anything, you have never studied anything that has collected new information much beyond the level of how you might fix your electric can opener. In the areas of the higher end of the nervous system, you have never gained any new apparent information that was satisfying. And one of the reasons, one of the descriptions of the reasons why, is that anytime you have an agenda, you can't learn anything new. But at the 3D level, you would not attempt to learn anything new, contrarily, unless you had an agenda. You wouldn't try to learn something unless you specifically thought, well, I'd like to learn this. I've got a little info going along this track, and I believe if I had some more information and went further, I believe I'd be satisfied. And it's no problem to find, to ask around, check the Dewey Decimal files, to find something that says, if you're interested in this track, here is step 3, 517. Next stage, book on the same subject. And you think, and you buy it, you read it, you study it, you can even apparently memorize it. But did it seem to satisfy? Because you had an agenda. But again, I point out, if you did not have an agenda at the city level, if you had no expectations, you wouldn't have tried it. So I'm sure by now that you see perfectly clear that that is not thinking all the time, right? You don't see that. See, if you have an agenda, you're not thinking all the time. You only think so far down that one particular track. You only think, well, what I want to know is this. And apparently, almost any snake oil salesman in the city can take you there. All you got to do is look around a little while, a couple of days. Jesus. If you're trying hard, your expectation is, I want to go from here, say, down this intellectual track here. It's marked, let's say, at mile 7, and I'd like to at least get over to mile 10. Of course, you've got ideas like, what I want to know is, what's the nature of life? Or whatever your astounding question is, or why do small electrical appliances turn on you after a couple of years? All you got to do is look around the city, and your expectation is I want to go here. Here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to know. And it's like you're on a kind of intellectual floor of a commodity somewhere, and you're shouting out, what I want is something to take me down here. And suddenly somebody will say, over here, they make the secret signal. And evidently they can. You say, what I want to do is go over here. They got you. Here's my book, such and such amount, or come hear a lecture. And apparently it will run through the system that, well, by God, the son of a gun did tell me what I asked. In a sense, he did verbally. He did, apparently, through intellectual means, take me. He fulfilled my agenda. He fulfilled my expectations, and I got there. And he says, thanks, that's all, and he leaves. But by the time the guy gets out the door, it's like Chinese food. So I hear. You think, no, that didn't do it. But apparently you went somewhere, because apparently you got new information. But at the city level, what I'm telling you is you didn't get new information. Somebody shuffled the cards around, you changed places at the table, but it's the same game. As long as you got an agenda, you'll never hear the doorbell ring, because it's ringing all the time. But people believe, well, it just rings at specific times, or what I want is a particular ring. I'm waiting for certain information. And it's information that I know I need. You can't do anything with such an agenda, because you don't know you need it. People are wired up to say, well, I believe I need so-and-so. I believe I do. I believe what would help me would be such and such. I believe if I could only do this, then I could do something else. I guess this, to many of you, are sounding, again, fairly obtuse. So let me be real, what I started for, a little more crudeness in the gumbo. Something about trying to think of everything you had to do in one day. For years now, let's get personal. Everybody likes these personal examples when I tell you things that have happened between me and people in the group. You know, the stuff I make up, the stuff that's happened before. For a long time, for a long, long time, right up until very recently, I have periodically, spasmodically, here and there, hit or miss, sometimes with a small group of you, tried to convey specifically that you're not using just the brain in the way you should. And every time I try it, it only gets to be about one step and then just a slight trip, and all we're down to is playing some kind of guilt dance between apparently you and me. I'm not a part of it, but I see it happens to you, because then you just begin to feel more guilty that I say, well, did you do so-and-so? No, I forgot. Or I just ask you, what happened to your car? What happened to your clothes? What happened to your head? What happened to your foot? What happened to your mind? What happened to your memory? And you, oh. And it's not an attack, but I've about given it up. And I've tried to talk to many of you individually and say, look, try, and you can drive a car, and you can do something else, like think about what you're going to do once you park the car. You can even drive a car and look around at the parking lot, the choices you have, and if you look around, even while still driving, missing pedestrians, curbs, the policeman staying there, other vehicles, you can look around, and there's a way in which if you tried real hard to think more, you might look at one of these lots, might not be the most propitious for your health, safety, the condition of your car upon your return. If you were trying to think all the time, something might, like somebody might speak up and say, hey, if I was you, I wouldn't park here. Like the parking lot itself. Or you might begin to turn down a street. You're faced with 2 or 3 streets, and maybe all the parking lots here are full. I have had very, very limited success with this, with any of you. And it's beyond, way beyond any feeling here or anybody out there that if you feel like you've ever been a party to this kind of attempted dance, that if you were a party to it, it is not an attack on anybody. But there seems to be no way that I have used in the past that directly can kick any of you into the position to where you will actually try and think more. As far as the 3D world is concerned, it's almost contrary again, because the more I seem to talk to most of you about something specific, and I say, do so-and-so, it's like you'll immediately even look more cross-eyed than you normally are. You go, all right, you know, if you said that to me personally, you took the time to take me aside personally and said, hey, do so-and-so, hey. But then that's your new damn agenda. It gets harder. Then you want to stare at it more instead of look around. In other words, you will think, in a sense, less than you were. But now, the less way you're thinking, though, is, well, hey, I'm thinking about what you said. I'm thinking about that all the time. And what else? I never done it to you this crudely, but the truth is, little else. And that wasn't the way to do it. You got to think more, not think less. But notice back in the city, this is nothing. This is nothing even approaching weird and goofy. In the city, it is known as what? Wheel of fortune? No, concentration. It was the wrong show. It's concentration. Is you literally, in a sense, as far as it can happen in the city, which I always like to hear this, is you narrow your focus. But in a sense, insofar as you can say that, that is what people do. And the only difference they see between that and almost being engaged in some sort of, or being a victim of some inopportune dazed condition, like the real idée fixe, that is, that you're so upset about something, or you're late for an appointment and you're driving around looking, and all you're thinking about is you're set up for a new job that you heard pays $80,000 a year and you could get it. But the guy who told you about the job said, whatever you do, the guy that does the hiring, don't you be late. And so there you are driving around, and you're qualified. You may get this job, and now it's 3 minutes before you're supposed to be there. And it's already 2 blocks away. And that's all you're doing. Everybody knows that. That's the nature of life. And then you end up and you run over the curb. You hit somebody. something happens. You literally know, that's the kind of thing. Or revenge, being drunk. Some of the things I've mentioned along the way is trying to point out to you that there's been physical reasons that life has had from certain parts of its being, bad things, very bad things to say about certain areas that I was trying to point out to you were not, once you got past the 3D level, were not a matter of morals, like seeking revenge, extreme anger. What's bad is, if it happened to over a large range of people in last body, you would have people not even operating at the basic city level of thinking. That is, everybody's thinking less, or everybody engages with that, because you know how it is get mad, and revenge is something just happened, and you're really mad. Everybody should know this. You can go for hours. Maybe you have to stay up all night, you can't go to sleep, and all you're thinking about, you get some picture or something you wish you'd have said, or when you do find the guy, what you're going to do. And it just plays over and over. It's just a damn record stuck, and it goes over and over and over and over, and you're thinking less. What's the difference between that, which any reasonably sane person in the city will denounce that, or to say that is not in one's best interest, that is not good use of the mind even. But now I'm asking you, what's the difference between that and concentration? All right, well, in the city they say, all right, concentration is something beneficial, it's something under your control. But what is the difference? And I'm not arguing with that's what they mean in the city, and we all understand that that's what it means at city level. But I'm asking you, do you see that both of them entail thinking less? One of them seems to be beneficial, though. I got to concentrate. I got a test tomorrow that I could get a promotion in my job. So now, all you kids, everybody leave the room, turn down that music, because I have got to concentrate. What you're saying is I have got to think less in general and think on this, the test specifically. But I'm asking you, can you see that? What's the difference between that and, but people don't believe they plan this. Of course, they don't think that they don't plan the other. So it all works out. But they don't believe that they are willfully involved with, wait a minute, that guy made me so mad for the next, until I go to bed. I'm not going to think of hardly anything except how I hate that son of a bitch and how I'll get him. And this one picture suddenly flashes to mind about, I'll be over there tonight, and when he walks in the house, I'll be behind a bush, and if I wait long enough, his wife will be gone to her second job, and I'll just hit him in the back of the head with a 2x4, and I'll get away with it. And it plays over and over and over and over and over. What is the difference between that and concentration? They're both thinking less even at the city level. And that is what happens, is one of the built-in drawbacks and safety valves, I've pointed out in many ways, about what apparently seems to be this kind of activity under any organized guise, is to tell people, all right, here is the vademecum, here's the book, here's the rules, here's what we're going to study, here are my famous words, put right down here, it's in a good outline, memorize it, you got to live by this until we get any further. And people will jump on it like hogs on soupy sails or slop. What it does is it cuts down on thinking. You've got to think more. So do you understand this? Again, ends up like some sort of almost deranged pirouette of trying to get somebody to dance and saying, come over here and let me show you how to do a certain step. And they come over and you keep trying to push them off balance. Or you keep stepping in such a way that they can't follow it. The point is, you're apparently telling somebody, look, come over here and think about this. And as they say, all right. And then you try to tell them, look, don't think about this. Sounds like insanity warmed over. You say, all right, I'm pretty sure that I know, and I'm working along the same line, and life is letting out this kind of information, and this is probably what you want to know. And the person says, fine. Right, now listen to me and think about this. And they go, gotcha. And say, all right, what I just said, don't think about that now. Don't get limited to that. And they go, all right. And then I could say, all right, what are you thinking about? Well, I'm thinking about not to let myself get limited here. That's my intention, because I'm trying to follow what you say. And I say, all right, follow what I say, but here's the point. Don't just follow what I said. What else could we call it except a new kind of intelligence? It is not the reworking of the old molecules. It is not a rewiring of the old system. It does not really address anybody's agenda. You just think it does. And people come in and they get carried away by me, or even on tape. And people just see me on tape, never met me, and write me letters and saying, well, I'm so glad I found this, because there's no doubt at nights, and they'll pick out nights sometimes, say, you were absolutely, it was as though that you had read my mind and what happened to me today, and it's as though you just addressed, from 2 or 3 weeks ago, thousands of miles away, that you addressed my particular problem. I know. I'm trying to treat you people a little more grown up. The truth is, that's not true. It seems like that. Because what you're asking, what you're still dreaming of, is you have an agenda. I've got these problems, which are just certain molecular arrangements in your thinking. And you're saying, at times, you almost seem to address these. What you're saying is, it seems as though I can almost get my invisible hand some way in your thinking mechanism and turn it around. And I can't. All right, I can, but it doesn't matter. Because if you turn it around, it's not going to cure anything. It'd create a new problem. If indeed it was possible, and I don't mean just me, for somebody to reach in your head, in your nervous system, in your very being, for those of you more philosophically inclined, and somebody could go in there and you said, all right, here's my problems, here's why I don't like blah, 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 and the person, okay, got it. And like dealing with resetting the tumblers in a lock, let us say, that they went into you and they took what you claimed that you didn't like, and they went, dun, 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 dun. And they said, all right, what you said, I have now neutralized, which is not possible, but that's what you'd have to tell people. I have neutralized that problem. In other words, you're not going to, what you told me was your problem, from now on you won't think about that. But I assure you they would not get down the street and have a cup of coffee before they'd be back and say, well, something's happened. I've got these 3 other problems now. I'd never worried about this before, but I left you and I was feeling so much better that I wasn't worried about death anymore. So I got down there and I was stopped in a restaurant and I was so happy and I was going to celebrate and have a cup of coffee, and suddenly I had an almost uncontrollable fear of what people thought about me. And I never worried about that before, and I couldn't even speak. I couldn't order my coffee. I had to get up and leave. That is exactly what you would be faced with. That is exactly what people are faced with that apparently undergo some sort of conversion, because it's always partial. It does not neutralize. And as long as you are wired up, which everybody is, that you've got an agenda that what I won't change is this and this and this. If it could be changed, you would not be better off. You'd get down the street and you'd find out, Jesus, I thought I had bad problems. But now this one, it's a brand new one. At least the old ones, you've had 30 years, you kind of got used to it. And now it's like, here I am at the age of 40 or 50 getting the hot flashes, and I got brand new problems. Now suddenly I'm worried about what people think about me, about how I look. And I never even thought about that. I was worried about death, and I thought that was bad. And now I don't give a damn whether I die, but now I can't stand it because I believe everybody's looking at me and going, look at that guy. How would you like that? You wouldn't like that. Push it past areas that might seem to be the example I just made up of somebody laughing at you. The ideas, the things that you seem to worry about, whatever they are, doesn't matter. Things that seem to have bothered you about why did so-and-so treat me such and such a way, or why does life operate in such and such a way, that's a problem. You think maybe it's a question. If at that level somebody could go in and play with the tumblers and the locks of your brain, and you say, what I want is, I don't have any particular personal problems, nothing's bugging me, but I want to know, where does the light go when the light goes out? And you go in, and somebody believes that's their agenda, that that's what I want to know. I want to move down the track from here to there. I want to know that, and I'll be happy. Or at least I'll know that you're on the right track, because you'll tell me that. But if you go in at that level, that's their agenda, and they can't get past that. Of course, I was being a little silly. At least you think I'm trying to be too silly. People would ask questions like, is God real? Or should everybody, is Christianity the religion? Or is, I'm talking about serious. Forget where the light goes when the light goes out. What people think are serious questions. If somebody would treat it serious and say, all right, I'm going to reach in there and I'm going to, as far as you are concerned, this question will be answered. It will no longer be a problem to you. If you did that, no one would be better off. You would not know anymore. When I say you wouldn't be better off, I don't mean in my opinion. Things would not have changed. You would not be satisfied. But that shouldn't come as a surprise. You have never gone anywhere in life. You've never gone to the smallest to the largest synagogue, to any church. You've never read any philosophy book. You've never read any book on religion that you read it and it says, here's the answer, or here's what you want to know. Or the real good ones, of course, first they ask, do you have these problems? And you go, my God, they read my mind, that's it. Do you want this question answered? Yes, that's it. I don't care the price, give me the book. And the guy describes the questions. Maybe he uses, out of 300 pages, the first 290 describing his life. Because most writers are, thank God, are very generous in sharing their personal life and problems and how they overcame them. Thank God for Gutenberg and people's problems. So at any rate, and he goes through for 280 pages, and you're going, yeah, 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 and he's saying how the problem plagued him, yeah, 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 and how he ran from pillar to post, yeah, 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 and he ran all over the world, yeah, yeah, and he bought books and wasted his money, yeah, 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 but he knows the answer, yeah, 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 and you get the last pages and go blah, 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 and he says, and that's it, and you read it and you think, that's it, that's it. And then perhaps you remind yourself by turning around to the front flap, 1995, and that's it, all right. And it wasn't it. Of course, it could have been it. It could have been as much it as any other it. But it was not it to you because it's not it to anybody. If it was it to him, all it did was it put a period on him. Yeah. It was not it to anybody. There is no it in the 3D world. There is nothing satisfying in the higher areas of the nervous system. As you knew people going by on horseback, it's not there's anything wrong with the ordinary world. Because as far as the 3D world is concerned, in our 3D existence, there are plenty of things in the city that are satisfying. Assuming you're just halfway sane. Good food, good sex, good nap, a good run, a good dive, all kinds of stuff. Just the right chord, finding out you might be able to sing a little bit, all kinds of good stuff. But not up here. There's stuff that's fun, learning how to play chess, go, reading some subject that you've never read about, learning a new language. But as far as my understanding, my intelligence can move from here to there along the 3D linear lines of reason, of study, no. And there's nothing strange about it once you see it. You haven't been tricked. They haven't been ripping you off, charging you $19.95 for all these books. Everybody's in the game. The guys that write those books and get paid for it, they go buy somebody else's books. If they won your $19.95 in one hand, they lost it to somebody else. They lost it to an astrologer. They lost it to their 17th wife. The money hadn't left the room. It just passes hands. But nobody's satisfied because nobody can win. Nobody can get out of the room. I just wanted to remind you again, or any of you newer people, that in the city, at the 3D level, when you're talking about anything less than the real singular aspect of human intelligence, then there are things that are satisfying. That's not the problem. Well, I guess I should go a little further. If there's anybody seeing this tape, and you can't really respond to me saying there's plenty of things that are satisfying in the city, such as good food and good sex and good exercise, and if any of you watching this tape are going, oh no, you're wrong, you might as well leave. You belong back with the church or somebody back at home. But I'm assuming everybody else. You understand that. That is not the problem. It is this. It is this that cannot be satisfied by 3D means. Because this is what stretches around the corner. This is what touches what seems to be linear tomorrow. And it cannot get all of its food here. Yeah. You know, if there was any thing approaching, what's a synonym for sin? No, never mind. If there's anything approaching sin in the revolutionist activity, that is, somebody a little past the point of just being a trooper, somebody just irreversibly entangled with this, it would have to be one thing. Does anybody know the word Misoneism? represent change. I've known that word for years. Now, I've never seen it used, never heard it used, and think about that. And it's a perfectly good word. It's in a dictionary. But think what a delightful word, and now suddenly think, have you ever heard it used? Have you ever run across it? And then to think, well, why has nobody ever seen, in other words, twee? We got the word, and nobody, it just never seems to arise in anyone's conversation. Isn't that interesting? Just, I mean, as soon as you hear it, you think, well, that's the kind of word that is good to remember. I'll write that down because that could come up. Think about it. Has it ever come up in your life out in the city? Have you ever run across that word and been embarrassed like, well, they used it and I didn't know what it meant? You never even heard of it. Think about it. Twee. Isn't it interesting that such a nice little word, right to the point? Hatred of the new, or distrust of anything that represents, infers changes on the way. But I'm fairly certain of the first definition is hatred of the new, which is right to the point. No beating around about distrust of that which may represent change. Hatred of the new. And you never hear the word. The idea itself, I guess what I'm hinting at, is the general idea of hatred of the new just very rarely seems to come up in ordinary life, does it? That is the discussion of it. I'm sorry. I meant the discussion of it, the mention of it. Well, let's turn the tape over. Several things. How about historical? Synecdoches. Sure is a lot easier after years of saying metaphor than it is synecdoche. But I gave you my word we're going to try to cut down on the metaphors. But see, we haven't. I just cut down on saying metaphor. I just now changed the name. Well, two immediate ones strike me that dip back into the city well and just take to start. Over the last decade or so, I have run across some historian writing, like these revisions that they seem to be going through of the attitude now in the Western world of the so-called Dark Ages after the fall of Rome. And I saw somewhere a historian, or an historian, for those of you that like it that way, that had, in a sense, I guess, attempting to rehabilitate the so-called Dark Ages, and had pointed out, what history I know and what history you know, let's just go along with it. It makes all the sense in the world. It makes as much sense as any other view, well, as most views. That the Dark Ages actually served, from one view, a beneficial purpose. The purpose being that as far as in the Western world, Western Europe at least, or the Western world, there was an almost total breakdown of what had heretofore been referred to as government. At the fall of Rome in 500 to 476 was in the Western world in general was the collapse of the government. And yet, according to this historian, he tried to note that it was actually a very distinct positive lesson to Western man. And the lesson, according to them, was thus: that men, society, collections of men, and the functions of society, the moving of commerce, social mores, religion itself, the kinds of beliefs in some form of morality and standards of conduct, and even an afterlife, purpose of life, that all of these things, according to this man, survived, and the lesson was that even without a government, without a central, strong, continuing authority through that period, so-called, previously called the Dark Ages, that Western man learned that he and his institutions, many of them, most of them, society could survive without government. Now, as you can imagine, I'm going to do something with that, or I would not have remembered that. I would not have remembered and enjoyed that. Well, plus, I always enjoy seeing anybody who has previously been spoken ill of rehabilitated, especially a whole era. All right. Could any of you see, I have not changed the subject, could any of you see that, in a sense, a revolutionist, some of you have already been through this, some of you are going to like this, but can all of you see that, in a sense, a revolutionist might possibly go through a kind of his own individual dark ages that would be ushering in this new intelligence? That is, for you to find out, which some of you, you've gotten nervous, some of you have run up this close and you've backed off, of almost having a breakdown that the Roman Empire in you, the established authority, you can just feel it. It's like the Huns and all the barbarians. Wouldn't say worry about the Huns and all, I guess worry about that it's like all the barbarians, all of the supremely uncouth have attacked you, forward, flank, and it's like the whole empire is about to crumble and you're going to lose. What power, what authority, what seemed to be some stable ruler in you. In other words, sometimes in some areas, I guess it's called, I feel like sometimes I'm going to lose my mind dealing with this stuff. What if all revolutionists have to go through a kind of dark ages? And don't anyone fret now, even speaking in metonymies, I am not inferring that your particular dark ages would have to last 1,000 years, 500 years. But there is some validity. There is some use for that. I didn't bring it up just to be clever. That there is a sense in which you have to go through a kind of dark ages to find out that this new kind of intelligence can begin to function, but in one sense, you're doing it now without the same kind of paternal, stable, predictable control that was being exercised right up until the final years, let us say, to stretch history of the Roman Empire, looking at it as being the government which was lacking after 476, wherein, according to this historian, after the collapse of which men realized over a period of hundreds of years that, hey, we can get by, in a sense, without government. Think about you now in that sense, or in your own sense, that you can still function, that you're kind of, in a sense, the institutions of your society can continue to go on, and yet you no longer have a government. And in some senses, the government that some people give up is their unabiding faith in their religion when they start. Of course, it wasn't unabiding faith that they wouldn't be fooling around with desperate people and dangerous people like me. But the feeling that my authority, maybe I've drifted away, maybe I never did have the right handle on how I should deal with religion and the great cosmic forces, but to you it was like maybe somebody living in Spain in 450, 460, that I'm a long way from Rome, and at times I feel like that, Caesar is as far away as Detroit, but at least there is a sensation that the empire is intact somewhere. The sun is rising and shining on Rome. And there is a Caesar. Maybe he's half mad, but he's there, and the son of a gun is in control. That is not just humor, because I've tried to also get you people, most of you can see on a good night, that just because the ruler seems to be mad or deranged, that doesn't bother people. Most of you are Jews and Christians, I assume. Just go back and think back what you remember about the Old Testament, about the idea of that Jehovah and that God. Now we're not even talking about Caesars. We're talking about what people thought was great cosmic invisible, the forces that created it. And look at them. If you can go back and read that now or think about it, and you don't think, if that's God, the man's insane. But does that not bother anybody? At any rate, there is a sense of great safety. It is built in. You can't decode it. You can't unwire it out of people. I'm not trying to, of course, talk anybody out of it. I've never tried that. But you do begin to run upon a feeling as though the Roman Empire is about to collapse on me. That I may be going into a period of almost, or a perceived period of some sort of wilderness or a dark ages. I'm not sure what's going on. There seems to be no central authority. But just remember this. Good Professor so-and-so, whoever it was I was trying to quote, he pointed out that not only for an individual, he didn't even bother with that. He spoke of Western man. So if it's good enough for a whole hundreds of thousands or millions of people, that if their dark ages was in fact not all as negative as history would have had us believe up until now, that it in fact was beneficial to Western man in general, those millions of people, think how beneficial it could be to you, one individual, taking all of the juice out of this, and you're not having to split it up, these other millions of people, just you, and your own little dark ages, and also being assured that it's not going to last 500 years. Well, how about, and I said I thought of two, if I was dealing with city people, these two could almost begin to look cross-eyed. But say, I know that you people can fly in a crosswind, right? Another historical struck me when I was thinking. In the same era, there was that which I believe was credited to as a Nordic idea. When the people from the Nordic area were down fooling around in Europe, and what I guess was now, well, I know it was now what is Russia, during the period of the Dark Ages, there was a notion, a theory of government. What little theories the mad Norsemen seem to have had. I'm going back now, I'm generally referring back to some historical comments that I've read somewhere, and I remembered them enough to bring this up. Plus I remember them the way I want to remember them to bring them up. But there seems to have been this Nordic idea, at least after the fact, that they had, that the only real governments that ever get instituted are always imposed by a foreign force. That is, that no people, no indigenous people to any area ever spontaneously form a government. Of course, I might add after the fact that all the activities which involved a whole lot of cutting and stoning and shooting and raping, not shooting of course, that the Nordic people did, you could look at this as a kind of, I guess, political justification if you were that cheap. But at any rate, the historians have even picked up on it enough for me to hear about it, that this kind of Nordic idea was that no people generated their own government. It had to be that some group of people somewhere, just sitting there minding their own business, must be conquered. Somebody comes in, a foreign force, and conquers them. And that's the way that all governments arise. That the conquerors, through force, through fear, through their own brute strength, through making the conquered people pay tribute, taxes, allegiance to whoever the king is, it's through that, whether the people stay there directly all the time or not, or just impose their will like, all right, now you people do what we said, we're just over the mountain there, we're just across the Baltic Sea, give us any trouble, we'll be back with a fury. That is the government. Even if the people seem to be then governing themselves, it only happens, according to this kind of Nordic theory, it only happens when an external force, a foreign force, conquers the locals. And that is the Nordic theory, at least I'm saying it is, my interpretation, that is the Nordic theory of the Dark Ages of how government arises. And their idea, according to this one historian, that was the only way, that all governments arise through that process. Again, I assume that you are expecting that I got something to try and twist and use this in my own devious manner. Does that sound as though it might have any connection to a kind of new intelligence? Yes, it does. It does to me. That there is no way that the locals, the aborigines, the indigenous people in you, the intelligence already in you, the molecular structures, the neural patterns in you, they will never form a government. They will never form a new government. It has got to be imposed from outside. Now, I guess I could take a group of city folks along these lines, a little more coddling with them, and then go, all right, got you. What you're saying is that if somebody wants to go any further in their consciousness, what they need to do is study more and learn more. And then I have to say, look, 40 minutes ago I told you that wasn't it, you weren't listening. And they'd say, well, you know, I wasn't here then. It would seem as though, yes, if it's going to be imposed from without, But it's got to be a foreign force. And where everybody tries to learn from is not from foreign forces. It's like this group of the original locals in one area, and they decide what we need is a government. That is, we need to be more intelligent. All right, to be more intelligent, what do we do? And they all go, we learn more. And so they all teach each other. Go back to the Nordic idea. It must be imposed from a foreign force. Oh, we'll go get a foreign book. You can't... City people can't leave the city. And I keep referring, I have of late, to this great poker game, and you can't leave the room. It's a fact. But if you want another way, city folks can't leave the city. But it's again part of the great works I wasn't going to get into tonight. It's one of the great tricks, a great blind spot. People in the city. Now listen, this is true just as physically, as materialistically as it can be, and then it's just as true as it can be speaking synodically. You can't, if you're city people, you can't leave the city. But you can go and buy a book that purportedly is about things outside the city, and you'll read it, and you'll believe that you've been there. And don't tell me no. Don't tell me no. All right, don't tell you no. You can tell me no. It doesn't bother me. Just say, well, I know the difference in reading a book and reading about Afghanistan. I know I've never been there. No, you don't. People in the city will read about being outside the city. Now, forget physical about being in Afghanistan. They'll read in the area, which is of the interest that we're talking about, in the areas of the intellect, the higher areas of interest of the nervous system. They'll read a book about such things that do not exist yet. Do not exist. Do not exist yet. Take your choice. In the city, and they'll read about them, and they believe that they've been there. Because in a very crude sense, they have. Because if you read it and your nervous system runs that energy, it converts the energy off that paper that talks about some ability of the human brain, some area of intelligence, the lack of which you cannot now experience, and you read about it. In a sense, you did experience because you read about it. And that energy that you converted from words into your own neural firing patterns, it ran through and made little ripples, and by you thinking about things that you can't do. But the description seemed to make sense. You remember about. You go, yeah. In a real crude way, you almost went there. Now I say real crude. Now I got to jump again. As crude as you believing in a more material way, as crude as you believing that I read about Afghanistan, I've been there. And I go back to that and say, now you know that's not true. You go, yeah, you're right. But it's not that simple to tell somebody that read about what it would be to be more intelligent. And they read about it, and you say, but you didn't do it. You haven't done it. And if they're mustering up the most sincerity they can, they got to say, look, I got to disagree with you. Because I read about it. I read that book twice. Several of the chapters I underlined, I reread them, and I got to disagree with you because I learned something. I got something from that. You read about Afghanistan, and now you believe you've been there. See, that's crude enough that you can say, no, that's not true. You read about a different kind of intelligence. And by reading about it, and it running through your nervous system, running through the brain itself, the words that seem to make some sense, and you now believe that you've been there. And in a crude way you have. Remember, I got to tell you again, as crude as reading about Afghanistan and believing you've been there. Because there's almost a little truth in that. People would say, if I wasn't being so pushy, somebody could say, well, you read a good book, especially one with good photographs, a good comprehensive guide on Afghanistan. Now I know I haven't been there, but it's almost like I've been there. I memorized some of the maps. I could now talk about areas with some authority. I could name some of the little trails that going up into the Kurdish region, and I could say something about the looks of some of the local people and their dress. Now, I know I haven't been there, but almost. I've been everything but physically being there, I've done it. All right, now back to the other. I can say, well, you read about something. You heard about some sort of other intelligence. Yes, and now I know what it is. And I'd say, no, you don't. And I'd say, you almost do. It's almost like reading about Afghanistan, but then your own intelligence at the city level would start saying, no, you carried it too far as always. Because I read it, and I understand what the guy meant. what he attempted to convey, I understand, and now I know it. It is now part of my intelligence, and it's not. The Nordic idea has validity. What you learned, apparently, came from the city. And that is no new form of government. That is no form of government. They were right. The only way that you can have any sense of authority, the only way a government can be established, has got to be by means of foreign intervention. It's got to come from outside the city. It has got to come from outside the ordinary structures of the nervous system. You've got to be able to think differently. You've got to be able to think more. And of course this would be meaningless in the city, but I'll go ahead and say it to you people. As far as you're concerned, you got to be able to think better. I'll leave that for last, not because it's best, because that's really the weakest of the three I said. You got to be able to think differently. If I was going to qualify them, those three, you got to think differently would be first. To think more would be second, which is a toss-up. Think better is almost meaningless, but I said it and I don't run the tape back. Because think better, consider that a real weak third. That runs from third all the way to 117th. But you cannot establish a government through self-intervention. You cannot establish a government by having your neighbor, and your neighbor is anybody that lives in the city. I don't care if it's a famous Dr. So-and-so, Rabbi so-and-so, Guru so-and-so. You cannot get a government established in you by letting somebody in the city attack you. They can conquer you, but you're not going to have a government. The Norsemen had it right. It's got to be foreign. Foreign. That's the real key. They didn't carry it that far, according to the historian I read, but if you'd had, say, two Germanic peoples that were too close together, too much alike, and one tried to attack the other, it wouldn't work. It had to be really foreign. We talk about foreign. You had to have these guys with red beards and these funny hats with horns on them. Of course, it was frightening enough because you first looked at them, you're afraid they're going to sing opera. But anyway. Now you know next to James Brown that Pavarotti is my favorite song. It was just a cheap joke. But it has got to be really foreign. Now, if I got to be more specific, none of these are of any specific importance. But I'm saying, you understand, foreign has got to be almost like these people from another planet, another city. Their language is different. What seems to be their customs. It has got to be foreign, according to that Nordic idea, which I am underlining for you in a certain way tonight. For government to be established, the conquest has to be by real foreigners. It's got to be. You won't have the fear. You won't have the feeling of some power that you cannot resist. The more foreign it is, the more efficient is going to be the establishment of this government. The more foreign it is, the easier it is for them to demand tribute, even from afar, for them to say, all right, from now on you send us 40% of everything that you do every week, and we want it on time, or we'll be back. If it was guys next door to you, if it was people too much like you, and they do that, don't have to point out anymore. It has got to be foreign intervention. How much foreigner can something be, from one view, than the way in which I seem to be presenting this, to ordinary sanity? From what your expectations were when you started this, assuming that any of you can remember it all, if you had any expectation. And if you can, you probably don't remember them now because they're so far removed from what this seems to be. And who wants to upset themselves simply by memory? Well, the way in which to look at it, I'm not just referring to me, but on your own level, is this kind of conquest internally has to be, or should be looked at as being the potential, the threat of being conquered internally by a new intelligence. But it is foreign. The more foreign the better, but if it's too foreign, of course, it won't work. But it is an intervention It is a conquest, in a sense, by a new intelligence. And now when I said this, some of this would almost drive you cross-eyed if you were just listening with 3D mind. It could almost sound to be antipodal, conflicting. But this kind of internal conquest by a new intelligence that is foreign is also strange and goes against the theory of the Dark Ages being beneficial, in conjunction with the Nordic idea of foreign intervention being the genesis of all governments. Besides all of that is this particular kind of revolution, this kind of conquest, is singular, most unusual. See, room to dance for you. Most unusual kind of rebellion or kind of conquest, in that you end up with a new government, but it's without a destruction of the old one. Well, 48 hours ago, no, what was it, 96 hours ago, Friday, I was trying to point out that you have got to have a kind of inflexible, stable underpinnings. I was pointing out physically and emotionally. But in toto, the idea of conversion that permeates so much of so-called spiritual literature all throughout the world, of conversion. That, some guy's walking down the road, scourge of the earth, a banker, a bagpipe player, somebody, and the great cosmic forces strike him, and he undergoes some kind of conversion. He gets up and he gives up drinking and burns his bagpipes. But the story always is this: a total conversion. The man was hated, he was despicable, he beat his children, he was parsimonious, and he got up and he came in town laughing himself off with this look on his face, and he was completely different. Which is always, life knows what it's doing, because these stories have nothing to do with even the possibility of what happens in the 3D world. The kind of even conquest, to really be stretching this now, internally of you by a new intelligence, by a foreign intelligence, not a rewarming of what you got, not a restructuring, not your neighbor. That is, not your neighboring intelligence, not you having some primary intelligence up here, some attitude, and then you got some smaller attitudes, and they kind of gradually take over or threaten. Now, it is a conquest by a new kind of intelligence that you no longer think like you did think, but all of the old government, what makes this most unusual, is it is not destroyed. Because if it got destroyed, you got two choices, verbal, I can put them to you. You would be nuts, by their city definition, or else you would be converted. That is, if it seemed to happen here, you would suddenly be a follower of me, I guess, and I'd have to move again, go somewhere else. But you would feel as though, yes, I've been converted, I am a new person. If, indeed, that seems to happen to somebody, you may say you're a new person, but you're not a new person. There is no such thing as a full conversion of energy. There is no such thing as full conversion from one potential to another, from one level to another. That is what is, of course, now I've hit the absolute limits of 3D conversation. It is a revolution, it is a conquest by a foreign power with a new government set up. But here's what's impossible out here. It's just impossible. No matter if the words sound reasonable, you do know it's impossible. As soon as I say it, you better know it. You got a new government, but without the destruction of the old one. Now, it sounds like it's possible, but you think about it. When does that ever happen? Now think about it real hard, since you've never heard of it happening. Never, 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 never. But now think of it. Well, all right. No, you're right. It couldn't be possible. Yet verbally, it sounds like it. All right. With some way, you could have a brand new government and let the old one still function. Don't start playing with words like function a little bit or appear to function. You have got a new government. You've been a matter of almost being conquered by a new intelligence, but without the destruction of the old one. It's got to keep going. If you're going to stay stable, if you're going to become a new government, if you're going to become the civilizing of the Slavs, if you're going to become Russia from the dark, smoky stink and slime of the Dark Ages, which I guess was supposed to be an improvement, you cannot destroy the old government. You can't shoot all the czars. If it happens, you're done for. If it happens, you've been converted. If it happens, nothing has happened. What could be said in 15 minutes? Well, I can take the last part I was tugging on and ask you this. Can you get even a glimpse of the kind of, not just unusual, I go ahead now and use singularity, of the kind of, let's be a little more individualistic about this, the kind of conquest, the kind of revolution that I'm talking about, and see that it is not now on a more individual level, verbally, that it is not in the sense of one person, of a revolutionist doing this, of there being, of the revolution as being a kind of ordinary 3D apostate and turning his back on his old allegiances, becoming a turncoat on the old alliances and allegiance that he had. It is not simply that, but he takes on a new one, that is, to the new intelligence. But he does so without being a real apostate. He does not hate. He does not turn on. He does not even badmouth. He doesn't even think about, if you want it that way, the old alliances and allegiance. They are still, in a sense, at their own level, at their own necessary level, they are still in effect, still operational, as much as his heart's got to keep beating. Even if you say, I now have a new intelligence, I know what you mean, you and I both know it is not in doubt. You are now somebody else. Your heart's still operating just like it did, more or less. So is your liver, so is everything else. There are alliances that one has had with life. There are allegiances of which one does not have to become a complete turncoat. That is not the point. That makes it singular, because your human consciousness, ordinary intelligence, plus all sorts of philosophical and religious tomes will tell you such things as you cannot serve two masters. You cannot have your allegiance. You cannot hold citizenship in two countries. No civilized country in the world will allow that if they know it. If you go to another country, you go into another kingdom, and you take up with their king enough that you would defend him, that you'll go into warfare, that you'll pay taxes there. Most civilized countries then will take away your citizenship, that they are no longer returning your allegiance to them, if you still proclaim any. That you can only have one allegiance, you can only salute one flag. The singularity of this is that you're not faced once you escape 3D gravity. That's not it. That's why sometimes, many times, I keep taking some pains with you and your people and worry about your sensibilities and you getting crushed under the verbal apparent load of some of this, to point out that none of this is an attack. I don't care what you were when you came here, what your religion was, what your background, what your parent culture was, none of that. It's not an attack on it, because you are not truly becoming an apostate. It is not turning on it. It can operate, it must operate, at a still necessary, and in a sense, unchanging level, but your allegiance now, no word, I'll just say simultaneously, that your allegiance now is with the new intelligence. But you are not a traitor to your past. And it's not because you're past, if you're a Irish Protestant. It is not that in some way you've got some allegiance to that, or that you say to your family. That's the 3D appearance. Your allegiance is to life. That's where it was. And so you have not turned your back on life. You have not become a traitor. Those of you who can see it, as another way of me pointing out, or at least pointing in the direction, that the past is not good or bad in anybody. The past is irrelevant. Life did it. The past is whatever life told you it was. That was your past. So what are you going to do if you had any intelligence? Any intelligence, what are you going to do about the past? Of course, in the city they say, well, talk about it, worry about it, discuss it. If you had anything resembling real intelligence, some kind of new intelligence, what would you do about the past? Go look up the definition of the past in the dictionary and just go from there. What would you do with the past if you had any intelligence? Now it's time. What can you say in 10 minutes? All right. Wrap up. Everybody remembers the Kairut, he asked rhetorically, that said if you got to discuss the price, you either can't afford it or you don't really want it. Everybody remembers that? Because that is a poignant one, I suggest, to those who can hear poignantly. It's even piercing for those of you with sensitive ears. At that, along with, you remember I asked you the little rhetorical question, like an excursion last week, that you could use if you needed some sort of evidence, not proof, but some sort of evidence, which is meaningless also, as to whether you really belong here, and I asked you that you could just neuralize it, even think about it if you knew how to do that. Would you do anything I told you to do? All right, let's take those two, and let me add in a third part for the wrap-up tonight. Maybe I'll steal from Kairut again. Story. Person trudging through the desert. Miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles. Dying. Close to death, and suddenly over one sand dune, there's a guy with a stand with water. The sign says water for sale. The person drags himself up and he says, how much is it? And the guy says, it doesn't matter. What difference does it make? All three of those together, remember? If you got to ask the price, if you're going to discuss the price, you either can't afford it or you don't really want it, with my question, if you need any sort of suggestion as to whether you belong in this, would you do anything I told you to do? Now with, what difference does it make? What's the price of water here in the desert? And the guy says, what difference does it make? All of that together. Does that lead you to want to drift off in some direction away from the ordinary flows and confines of how you think about you, how you think about this, how you think about what you imagine this is or where it may go or what's right around the corner. If you got to discuss the price, you either can't afford it or you don't really want it. Or would you do anything I said to do? And if you're in the desert and you find a guy with water for sale, what difference does it make what the price is? Does anybody get the drift? Does anybody get the drift? A real revolutionist would get the drift. He'd be the sort that, of course, silently would be inclined to say, you know, I get the drift.